everyone, my name is Evie Lupine. Welcome back to my channel, and today I have another video for you all. Today we are continuing our BDSM erotica review series, and I have 4 new books for you all that we are going to be talking about today. And I think this video is going to be kind of how it's formatted from here on out. I'm going to do a handful of ones that I find for myself on Amazon, on Goodreads, and then some as well that you guys suggest to me because, oh my gosh, there are so many BDSM erotica books and series. I could do a video like this every single week for a year and not even come close to running out of books. I do try to find the ones that are the highest rated, the best recommended, the best reviewed, because I want to basically look at the very cream of the crop, what is the best thing that the genre has to offer. So do keep that in mind while you are listening to this. I am searching for something that I actually think is good. This isn't meant to be just like, BDSM erotica is awful. Like, I'm genuinely trying to find things that I enjoy and would recommend to others, maybe with just a little bit, a scotch of ragging on some books when they might deserve it. So with that in mind, I want you all to know, if maybe you have no idea who I am, I'm Evie Lupine. I'm a BDSM educator. I'm part of the BDSM lifestyle. And so when I review books, I am trying to find things that hew closer to the real kink experience. I want to find things that I think accurately demonstrate what it's like to be in a BDSM relationship, go to BDSM clubs, and I think would be a good representation for somebody who is interested in trying kink out for themselves in real life. Now, I do understand that these books are meant to be fantasy materials. They're not supposed to be hyper realistic, exactly like everyday life, and that's fine, but I do think that it is okay to have higher standards, especially when it comes to introducing an alternative lifestyle to people that might not otherwise have any experience or knowledge about it. So with that in mind, the first book that we are going to look at today is called Dark Control, and that is by Annabel Joseph, and it is the first book in the Dark Dominance series. So as per usual, let us go ahead and start off with the blurb on the Kindle for what this book is supposed to be about. From New York Times best-selling author Annabel Joseph, a new standalone series starting novel, Dark Control. Not all fantasies are safe, sane, and consensual. Welcome to the world of the gallery. Juliet meets Fort St. Clair on a miserable, drunken night and wakes up the next morning cuffed to his guest room bed. Of course, Fort would never take advantage of her. No, the pleasure and pain he wants to inflict on her body must be negotiated in advance, because once Juliet sets foot in his private, exclusive dungeon, she belongs to him. BDSM at the gallery is supposed to be a straightforward arrangement, an affair by the rules, but Juliet and Fort's growing connection brings unexpected emotions they can't control. She's the free spirit who transforms his rigid world, and he's the dominant she can finally trust. Or can she? Alright, so that is the description of the book, and I actually read part of this book on a live stream because it's a lot. It's so much that I had to print out my highlighted notes from my Kindle about this book because I was worried if I didn't read them off verbatim, you guys would not believe me when I tell you some of the things that are said and or are done in this book. So we get off to a great start in this novel with this fantastic line. I never patronized touristy Manhattan BDSM clubs, especially Underworld, but my friend Devin had ducked inside, so I waited for my other friend in the courtyard, watching pseudo-doms and glitter subs flirt with each other in the line. Like, I love how this book, this fantasy BDSM erotica novel, starts out with just pure judgmental elitism. And I was kind of hoping that this would not be a theme for the entire book, but it absolutely is. And this is one of the tropes I've really noticed more and more in these series with the characters as well as with the settings, is there's often this air of like, ooh, we're better, we know more than everybody else, we're on like this level, and like there's kind of mainstream BDSMers and there's the fucking vanilla people way down here. Ugh, gross, who would ever want to be that, you know? And I don't really like that in my fantasy novels. I find it really annoying in real life. Also, who uses the terms pseudodom and glitter sub, which for me is hilarious in and of itself because it's trying to sort of position these characters as being like super knowledgeable and super like amazing at BDSM, but like they're using terminology that I've never heard anybody ever use. And if you are actually part of the BDSM community, generally, there are exceptions, there are always assholes. We try not to be too judgmental about how other people do their kink and the fact that vanilla people don't do kink. It's about what individually works for you and for your relationships. And just to have that elitism flavor constantly in there really soured my opinion of this book. Now, it does not get better from there. It does not get better from there. So we have Fort, who is our main male dominant character, and then we have Juliet, who is our main submissive female character, because of course all of these books, male dom, female submissive, that's just, I guess, what people want to see. Now, it starts off with poor Juliet being drunk and basically completely out of sorts outside of this BDSM club. Fort notices her, is like, oh no, poor little baby subby, let me take her home to my giant mansion penthouse suite because I vaguely think that she might live in the same apartment complex, because clearly she looks like somebody that would live in the same building as somebody with a multi-million-dollar penthouse, but okay. And he takes her to his apartment, a stranger that she doesn't know, while she's violently drunk, and just locks her up and keeps her there, which is a great way to start a relationship. And if that doesn't give you giant red flags off the bat, I don't know what would. Why doesn't he call her an ambulance? Why doesn't he take her to the doctors? Like, for how drunk she is, she might actually have like borderline alcohol poisoning. And the fact that he's so arrogant that he thinks he can just like take this stranger home and he would know better how to take care of her versus getting her actual medical help is kind of insane. Or at least he's fucking bananas wealthy. He could have like called a private doctor to come to his apartment and look at this extremely drunk girl and be like, is she gonna die of alcohol poisoning on my couch or is she gonna be okay? It was just a really, really bad start to the book. Now, something that I do appreciate about this series is they do take some time to develop the relationship a little. So it's not like this immediately happens and then like 2 pages later they're in a DS relationship. There is actually some time where they end up going out for dinner, they have a little bit of a fight, and they call it off and say, sorry, I can't be in a relationship with you, bye. And Juliet and him don't meet up or speak for like, I think 2 or 3 months, which is actually pretty refreshing. That gives us some time to have Juliet's perspective because the chapters switch between Juliet and Fort's perspectives, where we get to see more of Juliet's life. We meet her boss, which is this crazy, eccentric art guy, which is like honestly really annoying to read. I like at least they didn't do the stereotypical like blonde supermodel roommate best friend thing, because if I have to read another book with that in it, I'm just throwing my Kindle across the room, okay? I'm done. I'm over it. So I like that they did sort of a different side character for Juliet versus what you would normally see, but he's incredibly annoying to read. He's kind of just an annoying person in general. I don't understand why she works for him, but it's there. It gives us some more time to develop these characters before they actually try to have a relationship. Now, I don't know if this was inspired by 50 Shades of Grey in any way, or if this is just a coincidence, but how they end up meeting again is they meet at an art gallery. Now, Juliet's job is that she is basically like the art manager for eccentric art guy, so I don't remember his name, but he has a gallery opening, and of course, not only is he rich, but all of his friends are insanely rich, and so of course he goes to this gallery opening, hoping to see her again, or maybe they coordinated it, I don't actually remember from the book. I don't have a note in my notes that actually tells me what happens, but for whatever reason, they end up meeting up at her gallery opening again, and they go straight to fucking Bone Town, let me tell you. Oh, they go to the Bone Zone. Now, I do appreciate this, and let me find my notes. They didn't just have it be like, oh my god, suddenly he took me against the paintings or whatever. Like, they actually did something that these books don't normally have, which is they talked about protection and STIs and STDs. So, he says, listen, I'm clean. I always use protection 100% of the time. Except now, when I was somehow willing to risk going without it. What did that mean? I gave her a shake. Are you clean? She stared at me. I haven't had sex in forever. Yes, I've been tested. Are you on anything? Birth control? Are you on the pill? I have an IUD. So I did like that they at least had that conversation, because normally they just totally skip over it. I am completely against the clean versus unclean narrative when we're talking about STIs and STDs. It's really othering, and like, people have things that doesn't make them unclean, and like, I don't like that language. It sounds very fuckboy-y. Like, if you're on FetLife and somebody's first line is like, I'm 100% clean, uncut dick, like, that's a giant red flag. And so I don't like that language, but I like that they at least included that consideration. Now from there, they start to have a little bit more of a relationship. They start getting more into BDSM, and of course he wants to take her to the gallery. And I don't want to dwell on this book for too long. There's BDSM scenes, there's sex scenes. Just, if you've read any of these books, if you've listened to any of my reviews, they're all the fucking same. They're all the same. It's a little bit of kinky stuff and then some sex afterwards, which makes the fucking elitism at the beginning of this so goddamn irritating, because he's probably doing more sex with his BDSM than half the people in the club that he was disparaging at the beginning of this. Like, if all of your scenes are the exact same cookie cutter, spanking and then intercourse, gag and spanking and then intercourse, or bondage and paddling and then intercourse, like, it's the exact same thing with different combinations of descriptions in this book as anywhere else, to me, that's not really the interesting part. Now, the big set piece is, of course, the gallery, which is this uber exclusive, expensive BDSM club, male doms only, female subs only, and of course he wants to take her there to have her experience BDSM his way. Now, I actually read the rules for the gallery on a live stream I did. I will link that down below if you want to hear all of them. Essentially, what you need to know is it is basically a place, again, all male doms, all female subs, all female submissives must be wearing a particular uniform. They're all treated as communal property for everybody that goes there, and their limits are determined by their patron, the person, the dominant that takes them to the gallery. Oh, and also there's no safe words. So, you know, a great place to take a new person to BDSM. Definitely not something that would result in any kind of trauma happening. He mentions at the beginning of the book that the last person who went there threatened to call the police on them, which, you know, I'm not generally for involving the police in BDSM stuff, and like, if it's consensual, then it should be fine. And I can absolutely see how a place like this would be a breeding ground for asshole rich losers that just want a place to be able to privately / publicly abuse people. And really, when I read this, my instinct was, no, why would you want to go here? Like, you have no way out. There's no safe words. You can't have a phone on you to call for help. Like, no. For all you know, this is some fucking insane shit where, like, rich people pay millions of dollars to, like, murder poor women without having any sort of repercussions, like that one episode of Harlots. And But of course, they go to the gallery and she's on a one-bar prison and they're having an amazing time, a really emotional, connecting scene. And then he just fucking level 100, avoidant attachment issues, just fucking leaves. He's like, no, this is getting too emotional. You're not allowed to have feelings for me. This is just about pain because I'm a sadist and you're here because you like this, not because you like me. No, 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 no. Bye. And he fucking abandons her. He abandons her on a one-by prison in a dungeon where he is supposed to be the one to have control over her limits to make sure other people don't violate them. And she has no other way stop what's going on. And so for an indeterminate amount of time, 5 minutes, an hour, 3 hours, she's just there by herself, being abandoned by her partner in a strange location where she doesn't really know anyone. And I had to stop reading this book when that happened because I understand it's for dramatic tension and it's going to be resolved, but like, holy shit, what? Now, of course, eventually, the people around her see what's going on. They get her out of the bondage. They help take care of her. And eventually, his friends, who are also sort of the head honchos of this club because they're the main investors, go and find him and are like, dude, what the fuck? So at least they demonstrate that was not good behavior to do. And they end up basically putting a moratorium on his membership. They don't outright ban him, which, why? Because they're friends, that's why. But they don't outright ban him. They basically put a moratorium on his membership. And after this happens, girl just dips. She goes to Italy. She's like, bye, fuck everything. I'm going to Italy. I need time by myself and away from all y'all motherfuckers. And I'm really glad that she did that. However, because all of Fort's friends are insanely rich and have insane connections, he uses his friend, I think his name is Devin, his connections with the airline industry to figure out where she went. And then from there, he just asked locals for like the wild-haired American woman. And then he found her in a really small town on like some Italian Airbnb. And is like, baby, I'm so sorry. Please take me back. I love you. And she's like, oh my God, I love you. And then they live happily ever after. It's like the most bullshit ending of all time because all of these books have to end with the people being in love and okay. And like, y'all, this book was a fucking ride. I have spent way too much time talking about it. And yeah, I don't recommend this book. I don't know why it has 4 stars. It was extremely aggravating to read from cover to cover. So give this one a miss. So the next book that I want to talk about is from an author that you guys recommended constantly in the comments of my last video. I think this author is the most recommended out of anything you guys have told me to read before, and that would be the first Club Shadowlands book by Cherise Sinclair. Now, I actually read 2 books of hers, but this is the first one that I tried. I think this is the one that really put her on the map as a BDSM erotica author, and here is the blurb from the back of the cover. Her car disabled during a tropical storm, Jessica Randall discovers the isolated house where she's sheltering is a private bondage club. At first, she's shocked, but she soon becomes aroused watching the interactions between the doms and their subs. But she's a professional woman, an accountant, and she isn't submissive. Or is she? Master Z hasn't been so attracted to a woman in years, but the little sub who has wandered into his club intrigues him. She's intelligent, reserved, conservative. After he discovers her interest in BDSM, he can't resist tying her up and unleashing the passion that she hides within. Now, I have to say, just off the bat, so as not to disappoint anyone, when I read this, I was genuinely concerned and surprised that this was the author that everyone was ranting and raving about. I was like, oh my God, this is what the people want? Okay, so like it says on the back of the cover, this starts out with our main character getting in a car crash, wandering around, somehow finding a private BDSM club in like the swamps of Florida, and then being let inside. She's like, please help me, I am so cold and my car has crashed and please help me. And they're like, yeah, I guess you can wait here, I suppose. And they're like, oh, well, if we want to let her into the club, then she needs to sign the waivers to be able to get in. And she's in such a daze, she doesn't really understand what's going on. She's just like, initials, signs, blah, blah, blah. Doesn't really even look at anything. They don't verify to make sure that she actually knows what she agreed to going into the club, and they let her in. And it's basically a disaster from the very start. Now, this is a really short book. It's under 200 pages. I think it's like 120, 140, somewhere around there if you're reading the print version of it. And so it's a really quick read, which is good because I don't think I could stand much more of this than what was already written. So they take her to the showers, they clean her off, they give her some new things to wear, and then she's like, oh my god, what is this club? What's going on here? She has no idea what BDSM is. She doesn't really understand what a BDSM club is, and it shows. I get the idea of it, which is like, oh, fish out of water, a good sort of self-insert for a novice reader to BDSM erotica novels, but it's just a disaster. And from the very beginning, Master Z starts off with calling her lots of pet names, you know, like literally pet, things like little subby, and just, when that happens in a book, it's a major turnoff for me. I don't like it at all. You don't know this woman. She's an adult. Why are you calling her baby names like she's your girlfriend? Just stop. Just don't. Now, Master Z, and they don't tell you this on the back cover, is a mind reader. Like, actually a mind reader. I don't think he reads, like, verbatim thoughts. It's more like he sort of senses emotions and, like, vague ideas and things like that. But he's a goddamn mind reader, I swear. We are one step removed from just getting full circle back to Twilight, because we went from Twilight to 50 Shades of Grey to BDSM erotica novels to fantasy BDSM erotica novels to just, like, vampire fantasy novels again. I swear, we're so close. But he's an actual fucking mind reader, and this is sort of used as an excuse to why it's okay for him to do the things that he does, because he literally knows her better than she knows herself. And I hate that. Now, at one point, he leaves her to just wander around the club and see the BDSM stuff because he's excited to see what her reaction will be. And she starts a fight with somebody in the middle of a scene. So he's just allowed her to go wander off, no supervision, despite the fact that she has no idea what's going on. And she witnesses a scene, I think it's a flogging, and she just sees the girl crying and screaming and is like, oh my god, this is abuse, what are they doing? Oh my god, I gotta fight this guy. And she just like bodily like tries to punch the guy in the face or something, and then pulls the girl away from the scene. Is like, what are you doing? La, la, la. Now, if you know anything about BDSM clubs, you know, interrupting a scene, especially with physical violence, is usually grounds for at least being kicked out of that party, if not some kind of soft ban. Of course, that doesn't happen because she's the guest of the illustrious Master Z. And so she gets off with a warning, despite literally committing physical violence against people for doing consensual BDSM, which is a trend we will see in some of our other books as well, which I am restraining myself from talking about here. But yeah, eventually, somehow, what ends up happening, and this is the part for this book where I almost had to throw it down forever, is the way that they dole out punishments in this BDSM club is not by soft bans or kicking somebody out of a party. Oh, no. You get a punishment administered to you by a dominant at the club at their discretion. So if you interrupt a scene or show up with drugs, or I don't actually know what's against the rules at this place, but if you did something against their rules, they get to basically do a BDSM scene on you, which is how she gets introduced to BDSM, is Master Z does a spanking on her to discipline her for interrupting the other person's scene. And I was just like, Why? Why is this the way that punishment is handled at a BDSM club? First of all, you would have every brat in the entire house constantly messing up, because if the punishment is a spanking, then they're just gonna keep fucking doing it. Now, of course, through other events later on in the book, they demonstrate that the punishment is tailored, because he's a fucking mind reader, to whatever the person wouldn't really enjoy doing and would effectively teach them a lesson. And okay, sure, I guess that works. And really, this book was very hard for me to read because the main character has a lot of body image issues and self-hatred issues that are just, it's really, really hard to read. Like, she's constantly disparaging her own body, her looks, negatively comparing herself to other people at the club, convinced that nobody could ever be attracted to her. It's really off-putting. Now, I do think there is room for characters that don't necessarily have a lot of confidence already. I think that can be a good point for character growth over a book or over a series. But to just constantly have that throughout the entire book, like, if you have any problems with, like, body dysmorphia or an eating disorder, or if you just feel uncomfortable in your body, like, it makes it really, really hard to read this book, because you're constantly like, oh yeah, and I also hate my body. Like, don't go there, don't do it. No, don't like it, don't like it, don't like it. So, overall, I didn't enjoy this book. It was really short, so I didn't have to read it for that long, but it had essentially no redeeming qualities, and I hated it from cover to cover. So I was really concerned that so many people seemed to really, really like Cherise Sinclair, and I was like, this can't be representative of all of her work, right? Maybe this is just like something that she published really early on. She's gotten a lot better. So I did try out another one of her books. Now, I think this one is one of the most recent ones that she has published in her BDSM franchises. So I think this is a good representation of where her writing and her storytelling is at now. And this one is called I Will Not Beg. It is part of the Mountain Masters and Darkhaven collection. It is book 9. And this is the description on the back. She signed away her freedom. Starved for affection, young Piper Delaney surrenders her life to a master. But there is no love, only abuse. She's told she can't leave. She signed the slave contract. Years later, beaten and starving, she hears an English dom say the contract's illegal, unenforceable, and she runs. She reclaims her life and rises above the nightmare that was her past. But her enslavement left scars. She longs for love, but the only men who truly attract her also terrify her. Dominance. Hoping to conquer her fears, she visits Darkhaven, but the sounds of the club are too much. When a submissive panics, Sir Ethan steps in. The powerful English dom recognizes the shivering submissive in his lap. Years before, he'd corrected her master's deceit about a contract. She's come a long way since then. Cynical at being pursued for his wealth, he finds Piper's honesty compelling. She's intelligent, brave, and she needs him. What dom could resist? He's the dom she's dreamed about, perceptive, firm, and utterly confident. His voice pulls her from panic attacks. His arms enclose her in safety. He treats her like a person, not something to mistreat. As he helps Piper overcome her fears, she starts to fall in love. Then her past finds her and destroys everything. Now, this book is 354 pages, so it's 2 to 3 times as long as the other book that I read. So there's a lot more time for the story and the characters to develop, which I appreciate. Now, I think the biggest thing we have to talk about with this book is the fact that the story really centers around the recovery of a victim of abuse in a previous BDSM relationship. Piper is in an MS dynamic. It's called that. It's really just an abusive relationship with somebody, I think for a period of at least a year, maybe 2 years, where she is told that she's signed away her life. She's in this contract forever. There's nothing she can do. all of the worst possible things you can imagine happen to this girl, right? She has her head shaved. If she speaks without permission, he beats her senseless. She gets chained to a water pipe in the basement for a month straight, which is unbelievable. He gets another girl named Slave Gem, who is essentially her bully and is like the favorite of the two slaves and makes her life somehow even worse. She is starved. She is beaten. She is not able to contact her family. Like it is a nightmare scenario. And they end up going to this big party where Sir Ethan runs into her dom, her master Serna, her abuser really, and he kind of has this sort of subtle conversation with Serna where he's like, oh, well, you know, like slave contracts aren't really enforceable, right? They're not legal, and so actually you can't hold anybody against their will. Sort of like a wink, wink, nudge, nudge, because he could see how unhappy Piper was being in that relationship, and that gives her the strength that she needs to basically ask somebody at the party to help her run away. Now, that happens 5 years before the events of the books. There's a huge chunk of time where Piper gets resettled. She actually starts her own business. She has her own friend. She has a very like fulfilling and whole life, which I appreciate. Now, unfortunately, what ends up happening is she has some delayed onset CPTSD. She somehow managed to avoid a lot of PTSD immediately after the events that occurred. When she goes to a therapist, I guess they weren't very kink aware, and so they kind of blame the abuse on the kink, which makes Piper feel really badly about herself, obviously, and then she ends up dropping the therapist, and she doesn't really have anybody kind of ongoing in her life or in her support network that can help her deal with her CPTSD symptoms or help her overcome her post-traumatic stress in general. She does, however, have a really nice group of friends. She has a next door neighbor that she's friends with named Dixon and his boyfriend, which it took me like a couple of chapters to realize that the neighbor was in a gay relationship because there's so many characters that I think I was getting another character named Lindsay mixed up with Dixon, and so I thought they were the same, and I was like, wait, Dixon's a guy? Oh, gay relationship in a book. Wow, this is amazing. So I was really happy to see they had some diverse representation of other relationships, even if it wasn't the main character's relationship, where you could see the way that other people did BDSM. Now, Piper ends up meeting Sir Ethan kind of again at another party. It's kind of a comedy of errors situation where she thinks that Sir Ethan is a master to a girl that looks like she's not having a very fun time, and she gets really concerned, but she's also really scared of Ethan because dominants just flat out scare her. Now, it turns out in reality that what Sir Ethan was doing is he was basically babysitting another dominant submissive slave partner because the dominant was in the hospital. He couldn't keep up with their regular DS duties, and so in order to maintain a sense of normalcy, he had another dominant that he trusted, Sir Ethan, take care of his submissive on his behalf, which is something that actually does happen in the BDSM community. It's more common in the leather side of BDSM culture where those sorts of extended family dynamics are more commonplace, but I like that they did that. That was sort of an original thing to include in a BDSM novel. And what I really liked about this book is the fact it is a really slow burn for the development of the relationship overall. Now, in the first book I reviewed, there was actual time written between with the characters having, a couple months apart. This actually takes most of the book to get to the actual kink. I think it's like 60% of the way through before we actually get Sir Ethan and Piper doing anything kink related with each other, because what ends up happening is Sir Ethan originally takes Piper on as sort of like I'll help you kind of get through this. I'll teach you that not all dominants have to be scary, but like we're not going to have sex. We're not in a romantic relationship. This is really sort of they don't call it, but it's a protector and protectee relationship. And that, of course, gets blown to pieces quite quickly because they realize that they are very sexually attracted to each other. They want to do BDSM with each other, and they decide that they're going to end up having sex, and they want to have that be their relationship. Now, over the course of the series, I think they do a much better job compared to most other BDSM books I have read that are erotica, in terms of diversity of scenes, diversity of people in relationships, there's things like wax play, there's suspension, there's impact play, there's spanking. So you really get to see a lot of different types of BDSM that you don't necessarily get to hear about in other types of BDSM erotica novels. I think this is one of the only books, possibly the only book I've ever read, that not only names subspace, but also names aftercare. Now, they don't really do a super great job of like showing the negotiations. They don't necessarily do a great job of talking about why aftercare is super important, or even what the process mentally is of going into subspace, but at least it talks about it. It says things like, and then she started to fade away into subspace as the world melted around her. Things that I relate to as being something I experience in my subspace, but doesn't really dwell there. You know, it definitely, the focus is still on the sexual aspects of the play, the arousal aspects of it, but it's not the only thing that you see, which I really appreciated. My favorite part of this book is they have an entire Kinky Camping section, which, Cherise Sinclair, do you watch my YouTube channel? Because I don't know how else, like, I'm sure other people do this, but I've talked about Kinky Camping a lot on my YouTube channel, and that is something that I always look forward to, is something that I really, really enjoy. And the way that they described it in this book is somewhat similar to my experience at actual Kinky Camping, in terms of like, there's these really kind of wacky and silly fun games that are different degrees of BDSM related. Some of them are just, again, just silly and fun. You know, there's littles, there's a cuddle puddle, there's, you know, demonstrations of shibari, and just overall, I really, really enjoyed that aspect of it. But there are some things that I think kind of weigh down the series for me, and those would be all of the things that reminded me of the previous character from the Club Shadowlands book, because despite the fact that they are different people, you know, Piper is more willowy, she has long black hair, which, is that the first time we've seen a character with black hair being a main character in one of these books? I think so. And the other character is a little bit more, like, I think she's like sort of a petite Marilyn Monroe type is how they describe her. So they are very different physically. However, they do share a lot of the same characteristics. They both really, really love animals. In particular, they both really love cats. They are prone to physical violence at the drop of a hat when they perceive that somebody has been wronged in some way. It's kind of interesting how similar the two characters are for being in completely different books and supposedly having very different kind of roles in their respective stories. So it was very interesting to read. I do actually really enjoy this book. However, if you are somebody who has a history of traumatic abuse, if you are getting out of a bad BDSM relationship, I wouldn't necessarily recommend this one, because that may be kind of re-triggering for you to read some of the things that Serena does to Piper over the course of the stories, because they drip feed it in there over the course of multiple chapters. And not only is Piper abused by Serena in this book, basically everything that could possibly go wrong with her life does at some point. She doesn't know her birth father. Her mother ends up getting remarried to a religious zealot who definitely does some religiously abusive things to her. She has an older brother from the stepfather who is also abusive towards her and manipulates her, not only as a child, but well into the events of this book too. And she doesn't even get to finish college either. Like, everything bad that could happen happens to this character, which makes her seem like the world's saddest Mary Sue, in terms of like, oh, woe is me, my life is so hard, everything bad that could possibly happen to a human has happened to me. But she does eventually become more relatable as the story goes on, and you see how she has changed over her years in adulthood since those things happened to her when she was a child. And yeah, I recommend this book, just with a little bit of a caveat. I did enjoy it. However, things are still more sexually focused. It is definitely more in the fantasy territory than something that's perfectly 100% like real life. And I can see why people enjoy Cherise Sinclair as an author. Now, the very last thing I have to talk about today is obviously, dear God, why? Darker, which is the 50 Shades of Grey middle book in the series, written from Christian Grey's perspective. 50 Shades Darker, as told by Christian. Their scorching, sensual affair ended in heartbreak and recrimination. But Christian Grey cannot get Anastasia Steele out of his mind or his blood. Determined to win her back, he tries to suppress his darkest desires and his need for complete control and to love Anna on her own terms. But the horrors of his childhood still haunt him, and Anna's scheming boss, Jack Hyde, clearly wants her for himself. Can Christian's confidant and therapist, Dr. Flynn, help him face down his demons? Or will the possessiveness of Elena, his seducer, and the deranged devotion of Leela, his former submissive, drag Christian down to the past? And if Christian does win Anna back, can a man so dark and damaged ever hope to keep her? And that is the description for Darker. And like I said, I read this story first, and honestly, I blacked almost all of it out of my brain. It took me a solid 2 weeks of reading off and on to actually get through this book. Not necessarily because of how egregious the BDSM is, but because of how fucking boring it is. And I think I finally nailed down why. It's because this book has barely any environmental descriptors to it at all. Like, if I didn't watch the movies before I read this series, I would have no point of reference for what his house looks like, or what most of the exterior scenes look like, or his parents' house, or the place that they go to for the masquerade ball. Like, you don't get any sense of, like, the sounds that are happening, the smells, the style of the decor. Like, you'd think for how obsessed this series is and E.L. James is with Christian Grey's wealth, they would, like, turn it up to 11 with, like, making sure you know how wealthy he is by, like, lots of sumptuous descriptions of, like, you know, the expense of, like, the heavy velvet drapes and the custom leather couch, and, like, just something to give you a sense of, like, weightiness to, like, how fucking rich this guy is. They don't do that at all. There's very little description of anything outside of them fighting and talking. That's, like, most of the book is fighting and talking and sex, and fighting and talking and sex, and fighting and talking, blah, blah, blah. Just rinse and repeat that over and over and over again, and you've basically written any of the books in this entire series, regardless of whose perspective it's from. And honestly, the part of this book that sticks out in my brain is not any of the BDSM scenes, any of the sex scenes, any of the set pieces, but Dr. Flynn, who is a character that doesn't exist in the movies, and I know why. It's because if he was a therapist in real life, he would have had his license revoked, like, basically as soon as he started seeing Christian Grey. He gets invited to and then goes to Christian's parents' charity ball, and then dances with Anna, and then discloses some of Christian Grey's private information about her, essentially to say that Anna has made more progress with him than anyone else ever has, or that he's been able to do at any point in his career. He also personally helps Christian with Leela and constantly updates Christian about Leela. So for people who don't know who Leela is or what happens to her, Leela is one of Christian Grey's former submissives who has a really unfortunate story that happened to her where she ends up leaving Christian. She gets married to a guy who ends up being an asshole, and then she basically has a cognitive breakdown and ends up going back to Christian and is desperate to be his submissive again and have that type of relationship again. She tries to kill herself in front of Christian's housekeeper. She tries to point a gun at him. She escapes from the hospital where she's being kept, and it's very dramatic, and this is really where the series tries to become an action movie in book form and then just fails spectacularly. But what Dr. Flynn does is he keeps tabs on her for Christian and is constantly updating Christian on how she's doing and what she's saying, and just like, what? Like, that's, you're supposed to keep your client's information confidential? I don't know where you went to social work school, mister, but this is highly inappropriate. Don't read this book. Don't read any of the books in the entire franchise. It's not necessary. It will not make your life better. And if you're hoping this will give you more context to Grey as a character, it will, but not in a good way. Anyways, that is all of the ranting I have time for today. Thank you all so much for listening to me ramble about these books. Again, if you want to, you can always leave me suggestions for other books I should check out down in the comment section below. I have gotten so many. I appreciate all of them. What I am looking for in particular is LGBT plus focused BDSM novels, so things with a lesbian relationship or something with like a male submissive female dom relationship perhaps. I want to do something that maybe breaks the mold for my next video in this series. We'll see if I can even find enough to make that happen. Anyways, that's everything for today, you guys. If you want to make sure you know when the next video comes out, please do subscribe. I make videos twice a week about all sorts of BDSM and kink related topics. If you want to support my work, the best way you can do that is through Patreon. A link to that will be down in the description box below. If you already support me over there, thank you so much. It means the absolute world to me. And until I see you guys next time, I hope you have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.